Scott, welcome to episode 21, where we get to explore the evolution of PBMs.
Yeah, this is fun, Mark. I'm glad to be back with you again for this episode. We've heard in so many of our prior episodes how much the PBMs have such a substantial impact on patient access and affordability, and it certainly deserves more attention from us. So I'm glad
It does.
we're doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've had last year we covered it. We had, from the PBM's perspective, we had Mes Ventagato on last year. But one of our big goals is to educate, right? And we have two great guests to help us today.
That's right. We've got two pharma market access executives who presented a large and exciting session at Asembia that got a lot of attention there about the history and the future of the PBMs. We had hoped to be able to record with them while we were there, and the timing just didn't work out. But we'd like to welcome Steve.Stefano and Bill Leonard today.
Thanks, guys.
And I should note, I've worked with both of these gentlemen while we were at GSK. Steve was the head of market access, and Bill was the vice president in the group. They were both very, very accomplished executives in this area.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
Well, great. Well, welcome. We're thrilled to have both of you here. From our perspective, again, we're going to ask questions. Scott's going to ask questions as well, but I'd love to just start off. Bill, if I could, start off with you to let us sort of look back into the early days of PBMs and how they all got started. Tell us from the beginning.
Okay, Mark, I believe the PBMs have been around probably from the 1970s, but they really didn't intersect with pharma probably to the mid to late 1980s, and I think that kind of coincided with the spread of managed care across the United States and basically the origination of the IPA model HMO, where pharma started to discount in a rebate format versus chargeback format that they were used to, with hospitals and staff model HMOs. But in the early days, most of the PBMs, PCS for example, was primarily a claims processor, a medco, primarily a mail order pharmacy. They were actually at one point named Medco Containment Services. And I'm not sure exactly when the term PBM was actually coined. I think they probably made it up. I don't think we did. I think we thought of them originally as maybe third-party administrators. But the one impact, the lasting impact, but what they were able to do then, I shouldn't say the lasting impact, because they're still here today in great force, but they basically were able to carve out the pharmacy benefit from the overall medical benefit. And with the rise of the computerization of pharmacy, they were really ultimately able to intercede at the point of sale. And I think it somewhat took the game for the pharma companies ultimately out of the physician's office, ultimately to the computer terminal in the pharmacy.
Yeah, Steve, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I Bill's right on, but I would add that the computerization of pharmacy happened back with the Medicare catastrophic law in 1988. That was within a year it was repealed. But in order to participate as a pharmacy for Medicare patients in that law, pharmacy had to be completely computerized as far as adjudication and reporting of prescriptions. So that was the genesis of taking the third-party administrators, for example, PCS Health, and moving it more toward a PBM model, because now they had the road, so to speak, to put in formularies and to control patient access to medicines. So that was a big event. And the other big event, and I think Bill can build on this, was when three pharma companies purchased PBMs back in the early mid-90s. Bill, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I kind of like jokingly call it the shot heard around the world in a sense, because Merck, who was probably the most revered company in the industry at the time, which they're definitely one of the most revered companies today. They were real laggards in the managed care game. They were not early, and they were not early entries in a sense like Glaxo was, SmithKline Beecham was, Schering was, and whatnot. And for them to go out and purchase Medco really shocked the entire industry. And then subsequently, and Steve, you could pick up on it, but DPS jumped out, and within probably a couple of months of the Merck purchase of Medco, acquired DPS.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
And I think that the interesting thing about it, and shocking thing, was that the PBMs in the late 80s, trying to get the attention of the pharma industry were pounding the drum of therapeutic substitution. They were all saying, we're going to substitute, we can substitute your product, etc. I think the industry looked at it and said, no, you can't, because you have to go through the physician to do that. And and I believe probably, Stephen, I'd like to hear your opinion on this, but about the time that Merck purchased Medco, the merits of therapeutic substitution were being hotly debated, probably in a lot of pharma companies. And I think the senior management were not, believers. But when Merck purchased Medco, everybody, became a convert overnight, because everybody figured, if Merck is doing this, they must know something the rest of us don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so obviously SmithKline Beecham followed suit, and Lilly did as well.
Correct.
With the other two. And as you mentioned earlier, Bill, the market was sort of evolving towards managed care, and as Steve said, now they've got an electronic platform in at the pharmacies to try to start to manage it. But so Steve, what was the pharmaceutical company perspective on this, do you think? What was driving their interest in tying up and owning the PBMs? And then how did that evolve over the next few years, and how did it turn out?
So it shook up the pharma industry. I mean, clearly with Merck being, constantly trumpeting that they were a one-price company, and then they buy Medco, right? And the dominoes fall. As you mentioned, Scott, SmithKline purchased DPS, Eli Lilly purchased PCS. So it was a seminal event. Now, in my opinion, it was a good strategy. It was smart on their part, but the difference was, even though it was a smart strategy, it was ill-timed, because the PBMs did not have the clout that they were trumpeting that they did, and that the pharma companies that bought PBMs believed that they did. And the proof that it was ill-timed was within 2 or 3 short years. All three of those companies divested their acquisition at a significant discount to their purchase price of Medco, PCS, and DPS.
Yep.
But it woke up the industry. The industry was saying, okay, something's coming here, and then people got active in negotiating and in dealing with the PBMs, whereas before they were kind of giving them a little bit of a straight arm when it came to the threat of therapeutic substitution, the threat of rebates. But now those purchases validated the PBM model, I believe.
Right. Yeah. But in between this, just to elaborate a little bit on, everybody thinking Merck had the right idea, was that Glaxo actually came up with a concept called, that was later coined the Dream Team, where Glaxo hooked up with BMS, Pfizer, and J&J to basically combine 4 product lines together to outflank anything Merck was going to do with Medco. And Steve, you were
I was on that team.
Development of that plan.
Yeah, and to keep this short, the fact of the matter is the Dream Team strategy never materialized. But think about it. You got three big companies buying PBMs, and then you have four other large companies trying to do something to outflank. Clearly, everybody was getting the splash of cold water in their face.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if I could, then let's talk about the Bill. Bill, let me focus this one on you. Like, as they were spun back out, so after that time that the pharma companies owned them and then they were spun back out, how did their business models sort of change or evolve, and how did their relationship with the drug companies and let's call it the seven big ones, how did that evolve as well?
Well, Mark, I don't think it changed all that much, but when they were spun back out, they were spun back out with this, an elevated prestige of, not being just, a financer of prescription or a prescription drug benefit or adjudicator of. They came out as kind of as a healthcare company. They thought of themselves. The benefit design, when they were spun off, was still pretty much open in the sense that the third tier benefit design escalated through the 1990s. And I think as managed care spread across the country, the use of the NDC lock in the benefit design was limited because they couldn't sell that benefit design in states where there was minimal penetration of managed care, as compared to states like Minnesota, California, or Massachusetts. So when it spread to states like New York and down the East Coast, et cetera, they needed a more open benefit design because people were coming out of, indemnity insurance which basically had, minimal restrictions on drug access. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened in the spinoff was that it was pretty much a fire sale, if you will, because the first company to spin, SmithKline Beecham spun off DPS to Express Scripts for, I think, about $700 million, where they had purchased them for about 2.8 or $2.6 billion. What happened shortly thereafter was Eli Lilly spun off PCS to Rite Aid for $1.5 billion. We turned around a year later, sold PCS. Rite Aid sold PCS to Advanced Paradigm for like $1 billion after they had paid 1.5, and then I think subsequently after, Merck spun off Medco. So I think that really ultimately led to the consolidation, or set the consolidation in motion, that we have today with the big three.
So let me just, sorry, Bill, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but let me just tie a bow on this. So I mentioned the analogy of the splash of cold water. Once the spinoffs happened, it really became where the industry came up for air. And then they went into, I think, kind of a pause mode and were a little bit more judicious because it was ill-timed. It proved to be ill-timed, and it was now time to step back and say, okay, now how are we going to deal with this in a more conservative manner? So I think that kind of ties it all together.
Yeah, but there was some rebating going on at that time.
Yeah.
But it was sort of more modest by today's standards.
Yeah, way more modest. I would say it was, high single digits,
Yep.
And I think it was, a lot of it was governed by, best price. I mean, if it was, it was 15.1, so nobody gave more than that, at the time. So, but they were modest discounts as compared to today.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned obviously the consolidation started and the mail order was becoming more important.
Right.
What was going on structurally in the industry for the medicines themselves was the branded primary care medicines were starting to go generic.
Right.
And that was a big deal for the industry. Obviously, we began to see a shift to smaller targeted populations with specialty medicines and oncology and rare diseases, and much higher prices. So what happened then with PBM management, benefit design, cost sharing, et cetera. Steve, you want to start that one?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's exactly what happened. And anytime industries, companies within industries, vertically integrate or horizontally integrate, they're doing such for two reasons. One is to gain more efficiencies via horizontal integration, but the vertical integration is clearly to gain more power, is to gain more ability to leverage. And I think that's ultimately the splash of cold water, the coming up for air, and what we see now is an industry that is both horizontally and vertically integrated, designed to put more pressure on the pharma industry, clearly.
Well, but if we could just sort of follow that up, though. And by the way, for the record, I was Theracom. We were acquired by Advanced PCS in 2001. So for 3 years, I was part of the Advanced PCS team, and so again, we had a mail order pharmacy. We were doing rare and specialty drugs, right? So including several of the Glaxo drugs at the time. And I guess I want to go back to sort of this topic because the PBMs were owned by the manufacturers, but when did the relationship start to shift so that when they spun out where it became more adversarial?
Yeah, let me take a shot at that. I think, as the consolidation continued, and I think another kind of shocking event was when CVS purchased Advanced PCS, and then a pharmacy chain all of a sudden owned a PBM.
2004.
Yeah.
I was just going to add, Bill, it was 2004. I just want for our listeners just to understand sort of where we are in the timeline.
So I think that was a shocking. Everybody thought that Medco might buy a chain pharmacy, but they failed to move on that. I mean, they were far and away the largest mail order pharmacy at the time. I mean, their mail order capacity dwarfed the other PBMs. But I think when the relationships really started to get really contentious was in 2012 when CVS Caremark basically came out with the exclusion lists. Mm-hmm. And that really changed the game. And what that really did was that just adjoined the third tier benefit with NDC blocks. And that was kind of like Back to the Future, like in the mid 80s or late 80s when a few of the insurers like Cigna had some really restrictive benefit designs where they used the NDC lock. But again, as I said earlier, as managed care spread through the 90s, the growth of the third tier benefit grew, which was pretty benign for pharma because it was just a differential copay between a preferred drug and a non-preferred drug, which pharma companies could ultimately buy down with copay cards, etc. But once the exclusions came out, that really rocketed the discounts. Rebates went through the roof on that, and major brands were excluded. Mm-hmm. For instance, GSK had Advair excluded, and some really big brands were excluded. And then, through the grapevine, Steve and I were gone by then, but we had heard that they paid pretty significant discounts to get back in. Yeah. After that,
I think it was pretty common knowledge, Bill, to that point that, by the time the hepatitis C products launched and became competitive,
that's right.
And this was a good example because they were, specialty medicines, much higher price, $84,000 a year. The first round of rebate negotiations with the competitors, with the threat of the NDC block against one of them, resulted in nearly 50% discounts. Right. Which, what an amazing thing for a PBM, right? And it was in short order. They ran the rest of the categories, and the rebates became the dominant, thing in their own business.
And that was an amazing product too when that came out. I mean, it cured Hep C in in months.
Let me add that in addition to the CVS Caremark situation, another big event was the purchase of Medco by Express Scripts.
Yeah.
So, you got
What
this.
year was that? What year was that,
I
Steve?
think that was around
12.
2012. Right.
Okay.
So now basically what you have in the industry is an oligopoly, right? So you got, and that's the big three. So you got three PBMs controlling 75% of the prescription insured lives. So those two events really changed the mindset of
Yeah.
pharma's dealings with PBMs.
Right. And I kind of think, it happened in 2012. I think it was finally approved by the FTC. I think most people were betting against it, that it would be allowed because of the horizontal nature of it. And when they did finally Express Scripts take Medco, they kind of dwarfed it in a sense, CVS Caremark. And shortly thereafter, that's when CVS instituted the exclusion list. Mm-hmm. And then they were soon followed by the other two major PBMs.
Yeah. Could you guys comment a bit on the diversification of the PBM business? We mentioned earlier that the mail order early on had been a component, and then obviously the rebates became more and more important. But but they've gone on from there with specialty pharmacy, with 340B involvement, with the new internationally based GPOs and the admin fees. Steve mentioned vertical integration and so on. Could you comment on what they were looking for there and trying to achieve, and how that impacted manufacturers and their relationships?
Yeah, I think it's getting involved in different pieces of the chain, so to speak. Specialty pharmacy. If you have a specialty product now, what are you going to do? You're going to have to work with the specialty pharmacy that's owned by the PBM, right? Mm-hmm. So that's another point of leverage. So PBMs were putting their fingers everywhere that they could because they could. Right. And you mentioned 340B hospitals. The key to that is that to give you an example, if you look at a hospital like Duke is a 340B hospital, right? I, as a retiree of Glaxo, I could go to Duke and get my prescriptions filled there, in which case it's filled at an off-invoice price because companies are selling their products to the 340Bs at an off-invoice price. But then it's adjudicated, in my case, through CVS Caremark. So there's the caution, there's the threat of a double dip that occurs there by pharmacy. Right. So, companies have to be astute in their ability to pay rebates in order to pull those apart so that they don't pay rebates at the AWP price for something that's being sold at an off-invoice price. Yeah. It did work for a company, I won't say who it was, and we found $3 to $4 million a quarter that they were leaving on the table because they were getting double dipped.
Yep.
So if I could then, as PBMs are putting in place these NDC blocks and more restrictive formularies, and as you said, Steve, getting into sort of all aspects of the market, what could the manufacturer, or what did the manufacturer do? Like, how did the relationship with the manufacturer change? And how was that, like, tell us from being inside the conference rooms, like, what are the strategies to help overcome these, what look like immense barriers that the PBMs were putting up?
So I think that the pharma industry really took a position of acquiescence. Right. There was fear of their products being excluded. Bill gave the Advair case. When Advair was excluded at Express Scripts, hundreds of millions of dollars in sales were lost. And I think, the industry felt like they had to play ball. Okay, companies felt like they had to play ball. Scott, you gave the example with hepatitis, life-saving drug, and then acquiescence. Companies were given 50% discounts. I don't think that model is should be, I should say would be, should be sustainable. And what I think pharma companies need to do, especially the smaller to mid-sized pharma companies that are really, really at the bottom of the leverage totem pole, I think they have to try to think of creative and new strategies in which to deal with PBMs. What they are, I don't know right now. But I think there needs to be a lot more thinking rather than just, we were talking the other day, where has the relationship gone with pharma and PBMs? It's gone from negotiation to administration. It's gone from sitting across the table and working out a contract that's a win-win contract to one where you fill out paperwork and it's a closed bid.
Yeah.
This is, you put a number in and you hope you win. Mm-hmm. Something's got to change there in order for it to be a sustainable model. Otherwise, it's just going to be constant erosion. Now, what I see happening, which is good, is that pharma companies are getting away from the small molecule primary care products and moving more toward specialty products, orphan drugs, drugs that treat rare diseases, small populations, which is much more difficult to be put in a commodity type of position, right, as opposed to the sixth intranasal steroid to come to the market, right? I mean, it is what it is. So, better selection of candidates for entry into the market that target populations where you're meeting unmet medical needs, where it is less commodified. That, to me, is probably the backbone of what pharma needs to do.
Could I ask you guys about the link with drug pricing here in the U.S.? And some folks have hypothesized that the high rebate model and actually the continued growth in the rebates year on year have spilled over into the pricing actions from the industry. That the yearly price increases on the inline products went through a period where they were, well above the rate of inflation in the nation. But there was, many folks have linked that to the growth in the rebates, that it was sort of a, squeeze the balloon kind of phenomenon. And then more recently now, as the price increases have come under greater scrutiny and they have gone back down, the new product launch prices are going up. How do you guys see that? Is it part and parcel of this, rebate relationship or not?
Yeah, I would say it is. I think it's, just a shift now. If you look at the shift from, as how the PBMs morphed, into GPOs, and the reason I believe they did that, for a couple of reasons. The Trump administration was scrutinizing the high admin fees that they were getting in Medicare in the neighborhood of 5%. So I think they maneuvered out of that to GPOs, where they dropped the admin fees to 3%, but added on all these ancillary fees called enterprise fees, formulary exclusion fees, escalator fees, etc. And I think one of the other reasons for that was because once they were able to join the exclusions with the three-tier discount, their capabilities as it regard to size and control were unmatched by any single health plan, because they roughly had 50 to 60 million people that they could put these exclusions across. So all these additional fees, many of them are mandatory. And to your point, Scott, with the price escalation penalties, they have dropped, they made them mandatory, whatever year it was, somewhere in the early 2012-ish or 10 or so. But they have dropped them way below the rate of inflation, especially what we see in the last 3 years. And so they just became, that just adds to the rebate. So they might as well be called rebates. But those fees are not necessarily shared with, with all plan sponsors. And it's interesting that they're not, but I think the PBMs had to make up for their kind of loss in rebates in the sense when the big health plans moved in, because most of the big health plans signed on to the 100% rebate model. So they had to invent these other fees to keep up with their revenues and their profits. So prior to this big shift in their plan sponsors from the employer to the health plan sponsor. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
The
go ahead.
bottom line, Scott, Mark, Bill, is that, given this model, high rebates, inability to raise your price above a certain level because they mandate that you can't without giving additional rebates, portal fees, admin fees, enterprise fees. You have no choice as a company, as a pharma company, when you're introducing a new chemical entity, you have no choice but to come in at a higher price, all right? Because you know that all these other factors are going to erode your gross to net.
Yeah.
So this model, I really believe it fosters higher introductory prices. And in fact, PBMs, by and large, don't mind higher introductory prices because it helps them with their rebate guarantees.
Right.
So it's a model. It's almost counterintuitive. It's a model that generates higher launch prices.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, I think that's where, if I could just start with you on the next question, which is that, with everything that's been going on, the consolidation that's happening, the increase in the rebates, as you said, the business model drives higher launch prices. United announced just a week or two ago or a few weeks ago about second quarter profits of almost $5-6 billion. I mean, it's almost $2 billion a month they're making, driven in large part because they're PBM. There has been some growing public scrutiny of PBMs. The FTC has come out with their initial report. There was a testimony and a report out of one of the congressional committees. What do you expect to happen as a result of all this public scrutiny? Where do you look into the crystal ball and see where this could go?
Yeah, it's a great question. There is public scrutiny, although I will tell you, or I believe, that I don't think the general public understands this model at all. Thank God that the FTC and the government, Congress or whatever, is looking into these practices. Thank God. Having said that, what do I think? I don't think much, if anything, will happen. I hope something happens. But I think that pharma cannot sit back and just rest and believe that the government's going to solve this problem. I really don't think that they should sit back and rest. What I think they need to do is they should support via their trade organization, pharma, all legislative activity, all FTC activity that's designed to peek under the covers and maybe make a change here on the practices of PBMs. But at the same time, they need to themselves need to help solve their own problem by building, and I keep going back to this, by building better strategies to deal with PBMs in the interim. To think that pharma and the government are going to be bedfellows, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, you still hear a lot of rhetoric where people running for office are talking about controlling the pharmaceutical industry. And then, as you said, Mark, how many of those people are talking about a $5 billion per quarter report, a profit report by United Healthcare? They talk about pharma profits, but you rarely hear about PBM profits. Now, there was hearings on that, and let's face it, they're middlemen. That's what they are, and they're not adding, in my opinion, to science here. They're more adding to finance.
Right. Adding to cost. Bill, anything you want to add?
No, I think Steve pretty much summed it up.
Yeah. Well, more recently, and I think this was part of your discussion at Assembia, we're aware that you guys in your new firm are doing some prognostication work regarding the PBM industry looking forward. And so, are there any other takeaways from any of that work beyond what we've discussed here that
No,
you want to share?
we just started.
Yeah.
You know, we got off to a slow start, to be honest with you. We're going to kick that back up. But
Okay.
the goal of that study is we're going to talk to about 40 individual folks in all different disciplines. Ex-PBM executives, current PBM executives, ex-pharma executives, current pharma executives, people from Wall Street, people from ancillary services like hubs, and try to the goal is to get a 5-year look going forward as to what PBMs are going to look like 5 years from now. And, you know, to me, and I mentioned this to Bill yesterday, it's kind of like what Wayne Gretzky said is, you know, he was great because he didn't look where the puck was, he looked where the puck was going to go. And that's the goal of this study, is to see where the puck is going to go.
Yeah, that's great. Well, in one of those veins, and this will be my last question, but one of the places the puck is going for the industry, as you know, is towards even smaller and smaller populations and more advanced therapies. You can imagine a future of more, you know, cell and gene therapy and rare disease kinds of conditions. You know, given what you mentioned earlier about those categories being higher unmet need, harder for the PBMs to manage, and oftentimes having with, you know, some direct distribution channels as well.
Right.
What do you imagine might be the future for the PBM industry as it relates to some of those kinds of therapies?
You want me to take that? Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I would think, you know, I don't see the PBM industry changing all that much. I think
Yep.
you know, they're doing very well right now, and I don't think they're going to change the game necessarily. I think what pharma needs to do is kind of rethink, at least initially, the launch of any product. I don't think you can launch in the same old fashion that they used to, because primarily, you know, they run into a brick wall on day one with PBMs, especially with the new to market blocks. Could take them a year to get on formulary if they even ever do. So I think, you know, if we were to advise a company right now, I think they got to rethink the launch and, you know, figure out ways, can we launch, you know, without the PBMs, at least for some time, until we can build some volume so that we have some leverage against them when we get to the point of negotiation, if it's even called that anymore.
So Scott, let me answer your question by asking a rhetorical question. So the question is, are PBMs healthcare companies or are they fiduciaries? And now with you know, personalized medicine, now is their opportunity to demonstrate that they're healthcare companies, because the same rebate model, commodity model doesn't exist if companies are coming out with personalized medicine or highly specialized forms of medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that.
Well, if I could, just before we get to our final question, because I think you mentioned that are they going to be fiduciaries? There's some lawsuits now that are suing. Some of the big employers are suing their PBMs that they're in essence not serving as a fiduciary, and you're seeing a lot of effort from people like Mark Cuban and his platform, and obviously his followers, that he's able to reach with his message that, you know, CEOs need to wake up and realize they're being fleeced by the big three. What do you see could result from sort of those efforts? Could anything come of that to sort of make these PBMs more accountable to serving the patients if they are going to truly be healthcare companies?
They're big. The PBMs are big, but I'm I'm a big fan of the disruptor organizations, whether it's Mark Cuban's company or Sembia or other hub services.
Yep.
And I think pharma needs to do what they did in the 80s with managed care and really learn those types of organizations and find out where they can support those organizations in a way where those disruptors are making it easier for patients to get access to medicines.
Yeah, interesting. Yep.
Bill, anything you want to add there?
No, I agree with Steve. I think the more the farmer engages with the disruptors, if you will, the better off they'll be, and hopefully there's more disruptors that come to the market. They won't be called disruptors anymore, but somehow the game needs to be changed. And I think it's a tough uphill climb because of the power of the PBMs. But if a farmer is going to continue on this pace, if drug discovery, I think something has to give here.
Do you think the transparent PBMs that are out there, would you consider them a disruptor?
Well, they could be. It's interesting you bring that up because probably in the early 2000s there were a lot of smaller PBMs that were still in existence, and a lot of them called them transparent PBMs because it was always alleged that the PBMs worked with a black box theory, that what came in didn't go out, and that they were in bed, with the pharma industry. But I think one of the mistakes pharma made in the past was, we were always stuck on this concept of size and control. So these little PBMs that came out, because they didn't have the size, they had the same control as the big guys, but because they had a smaller size, they weren't given the same discounts as the big guys. So the big guys got bigger, small guys went out of business. So if pharma could rethink that now, it could be an attempt to try to fragment this industry, because this industry, the PBM industry had been fragmented, but then it consolidated into the big three. So one of the questions is could it be somehow, could pharma help some fragmentation of this industry?
Yeah.
So let me give an example real fast. So back in the 70s and 80s, we had the big three automotive companies, right? And they controlled. And then what happened? Then you had a bunch of little auto manufacturers come into the market, and now you got great competition inside the market. So to Bill's point, the more fragmented it is, the better it'll be.
Yeah.
Well, that leads us to our final question, and I know you guys want to do your work so you can have the interviews to help you answer this question, but we're going to ask you to give us a little early peek as to what if you could do anything, like if you could, do anything you'd like to improve access to medicine and affordability for patients, what would be your prescription for better access? Bill, let's start with you, and then Steve.
Well, if I could wave a magic wand, I would basically ban the new-to-market blocks that they all utilize right now. That would speed up access, if you will.
Right.
I would think these ancillary fees that the PBMs charge, have to be scrutinized, and and somehow an education of plan sponsors. But the difficulty of that, that aspect would be that if you look at the number of plan sponsors of any of these big PBMs, they number in the thousands, and most of them, are the small employer, and most of them are clueless about, what's going on with the PBMs. So maybe start with big corporations and get them to push back, because you need fewer arms and legs to do that than running after every, small company in the country. But there needs to be an education on the consumer side, if you will, and a pushback from pharma on, all these fees, and whether they can do it directly or indirectly through the disruptors, they need to really consider this and attempt to change the game.
Great. Steve?
Yeah, so I like to think of it in terms a little more broadly in that pharma needs to change the score. If you're in a ball game and you're getting killed, you call timeout and you try to change the score. And the way you change the score is you change your strategy. I think pharma has to change their strategy. They've been playing defense the whole time, and I
Right.
think now's the time, whether it's through the disruptors or whether it's through support of legislation or legal issues, I think they got to play offense, and they got to really think through a new way of interacting with PBMs. And I believe in the end, if they don't, patient access to medicines won't change, and if they do and they're successful, patient access to medicines will change.
Well said. Well said.
Very good.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Bill, for joining us today, giving us your experience and your expertise along the ways and your views. And I can't wait for that for you guys to do this work and interview everybody and help us figure out where things could go over the next 5 years.
Yeah, we're going to get to it. Yep.
We'll try. So,
Well, that's great. Scott, you want to give us, or you want me to go first? By the way, if you don't mind, Steve and Bill, Scott and I, at the end of every episode, we sort of summarize some key points, some takeaways for our listeners.
Yeah.
So,
I'll take a crack first, Mark. You and others have heard me say before, sometimes in bewilderment, that we've got this high price, high friction, low access system. It's the exact opposite of what any rational
Right.
person would hope for or would try to design. And
Right.
and you just scratch your head and wonder, like, how did we land here? And it's wonderful. It's fascinating, for me to hear through the lens of some people who've lived it, and obviously paid attention as they went through it as well, how that did come to pass. And what you see, I would take away is that these were actually all kind of rational choices by the various parties involved in the moment, given the dynamics, sometimes competitive actions, sometimes competitive then reactions and all that sort of thing. But nonetheless, a series of rational choices combined with some structural changes in both industries, managed care and the pharmaceutical industry, have resulted in this crazy system that gives us, the opposite of what we hoped for. The other interesting, one other interesting nugget for me was Bill's comments about the size and control model of contracting for the industry. I agree with that completely. I think, the industry essentially through its strategy kind of contributed to the consolidation in that model, and they've contributed moreover to the difficulty that the new startups with different ideas have in trying to break through and get out. And I agree with both of them that it would behoove the industry to do more experimentation now, be more open to some of these smaller, more alternative kinds of PBMs, and do some experimentation with them while they also rethink their strategy as it relates to the big three, as Steve was saying. So anyway, a lot of fun for me to listen to this and try to make sense out of it in my own mind and experience. Thank you.
right. No, absolutely.
How about you,
And I
Mark?
guess,
What's the
well, I'm going to go back to the sort of the history, right? The connectivity of drugs, right? The fact that you could walk into any drugstore in America, you can put a little card in front. You can't do that anywhere else in healthcare. And there's a saying that if you can't change anything that you can't measure, and you can find out today what drugs were filled and how much it was for as of yesterday.
Yeah.
You can't do that for knee surgeries or hip replacements or other things. And so people lose sight of the fact that drugs in this country, according to the AMA, it's still less than 10%. If you include drugs that are administered in hospitals and other settings, okay, maybe it gets up to 15%. That still means 85% of the spending in this country is on other things that are not measured. And so one of the reasons I think the industries had to play defense all these years is because they've been under attack, right? And we all know, we're on the inside here, we know that the list price that's gone up, you know, to a large extent, has never gone to the drug companies, right? And, you know, Drug Trends and Adam Fine have done great work on this to show that there's been a net decrease. The net price for the manufacturers has gone down over that time, and all of that spread has gone to, you know, as they said, the middlemen, right? The people in the middle. And so, you know, I think that helps explain the attack, but it doesn't change the fact that we're attacking the one part of our industry that creates cures, right? That creates treatments, that creates miracles. And we can't give up on that side of the business. You know, 5 years from now, we don't want to be in a situation, our last episode covered this as well. We don't want to be in a situation where where the medicine cabinet in this country has closed, right? That would be a shame. Especially for the four of us, because we're getting older and we're the ones who are going to need it the most, right? So
That's true.
So that's critical. The other thing is the point they made about, in spite of all the public scrutiny, there's probably, the industry's probably not going anywhere anytime soon.
Sure.
And that's, to me, that was like a punch in the gut. But you know, I think there's a lot we have to do. As you said, there's a lot of things we could do. But that's where I think it's disappointing. And it goes to why we have this even podcast, right, Scott? Right? Which is, what can we all do to educate, advocate, and hopefully inspire change? And so with that, this has been an incredibly valuable educational episode. I think, you know, and if I could just wrap up by saying thank you again to Steve and to Bill for joining us and helping us again cover this incredibly important topic.
Thank you.
Steve,
thank you,
or
guys.
Scott, anything else you want to add?
No, just add my thanks. It's been wonderful reconnecting and learning from these fellows.
Thanks,
Oh,
guys.
great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And with that, we wrap up episode 21. We look for, you could see our show notes. We put them into the descriptions. We don't always put them into different, but in there you'll get more information. We'll give you access to Bill and to Steve and their information about their new company, which is called ReprizioRx. And hopefully they'll let you sign up to get advanced copies of their work that they're going to do. But we'll have more information in the show notes. And as always, we ask that you please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please email Scott and I at comments@prescriptionforbetteraccess.com. And with that, it's a wrap for episode 21. Thank you, Scott.
Take care.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Steve. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.